Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this month's staff chat. My name is Priscilla Andrews. I'm the clinical manager here at the Cancer Wellness Center. For those of you joining us for the first time this month, the staff chat series was created as a way to give our participant community an opportunity to hear a conversation between two professionals talking about an issue that is of interest or concern for people impacted by cancer diagnosis. And I am so excited today. I think everybody, if you've seen one of these before, I'm always excited, but I am in particular excited because it is an area of interest to me to have Gabby Wolk here with us today to talk about psychedelics and cancer. So Gabby, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I am very excited. This area I'm very passionate about, and I'm not an expert yet, but I'm just always so interested to talk about anything related to psychedelics and therapy.
It's such, I have like a little toe dipped into the water of understanding it, and it just is such a area of promise. So I'm really interested to kind of learn more from you today and to see where this is headed with our field. Just for a little bit of introduction, because Gabby, you're one of my colleagues here at the center, but maybe just if you could share a little bit about your role here at the center, and then also kind of what drew you or where your interest drew you to psychedelics and their use in mental health.
Yeah, sure. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and at the center, I do individual counseling as well as facilitate two of the support groups. And I also supervise a student now. So I have a few different roles here. And as far as psychedelics, I got interested first from this documentary that came out in 2019 called Fantastic Fungi, which is on Netflix if anyone's interested to watch that. But
and what's the name again? Fantastic Fungi. Okay.
Yeah, so it goes into all the wonders of both like psychedelic mushrooms, but also gourmet and medicinal mushrooms. And what was most interesting to me is they featured the studies going on at NYU and Johns Hopkins about using psilocybin mushrooms with cancer patients. So I know we'll talk a little bit more about that. But after seeing that, I got just interested in following everything I could, whether it's articles, Instagram accounts about all psychedelic related things. And I ended up getting accepted to a program that trains for Mdma assisted therapy. So that was with MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, long name. But they are the ones who most people may have seen in the news, even like the Today Show, because they are the furthest along and closest to getting FDA approval for Mdma used for PTSD treatment specifically.
Oh, interesting. Well, and I heard you say a few things talking about mushrooms, talking about psilocybin, talking about MDA. Maybe to orient our audience, if you could just talk broadly about, when we talk about psychedelics, what are we referring to, and what are some of the names people might hear that fall into that category?
Sure. So yeah, broadly, psychedelics are hallucinogenic drugs, or maybe we'll soon call them medicines. Their primary effect is to trigger an altered state of consciousness. So that can include visual effects, psychological effects, auditory changes. And the word itself, psychedelic, means mind revealing or mind manifesting. So yeah, the classic psychedelics I think people will have heard of are psilocybin or magic mushrooms, LSD or acid, and maybe peyote or mescaline. So actually, and that brings me to another point, that some psychedelics are created in a lab or synthetic, like LSD or MDMA. also called ecstasy. And then, there's plant-based that there are psychedelics that are natural plants, like mushrooms or peyote.
Yeah. Well, and I think something as you're naming all of these things, something that's occurring to me is, I think I certainly grew up with the idea of psychedelics being these like illicit drugs or like something you did when you were in college or at a party. But I think what that overlooks is that, especially I know very little about LSD, but that like many of these substances, that there was actually historically a lot of research being done about how they could be applied as medicinal. Could you speak a little bit more to
Right.
that?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of research was going on 50, 60 years ago about using LSD and later psilocybin too, but specifically for like depression, anxiety. And then there was a big halt on it when they were changed to Schedule I drugs, meaning that basically they're saying that there's no medicinal use for those substances, which is why it's great that they're even in clinical trials now, because hopefully that can change and their scheduling can change to acknowledge the healing potential of them.
Because my understanding is that the research that was historically coming out, that they were finding that there was therapeutic use for it, that the classification was not aligned with the actual research findings associated with LSD or psilocybin back mid 20th century.
Right. Yeah, that's the really unfortunate part, because I think we could have been so much further in knowing how helpful these could be if they were able to keep researching them without problems.
Yeah. So when you think about the research, I mean, you certainly, John Hopkins is like, I think the biggest name that I've heard of, which I will say that really excites me because it is such a credible, well-established university and research hub that they're involved in this research along with NYU. So what are some of the research studies that you're aware of that are going on now, and how are these different, I don't know, I feel like I want to call them substances. I don't know if I should call them medicines. Like I'm even kind of struggling to figure out, but the psychedelics, what are some of the research studies, the psychedelic itself, as well as like what they're actually looking for as far as effect or application?
Sure. So LSD there are trials for addiction as well as end of life distress. And then ayahuasca is being used for addiction, depression, and anxiety. Mescaline, I think there was for addiction. And then MDMA or ecstasy, that's the one that with MAPS is getting pretty far with PTSD. And that's actually predicted to be legal for assisted therapy in late 2023. So that's exciting.
Oh, wow. And is that federal level or state level?
Yeah, so federal level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I can go a little more into what those trials look like, and what that might look like as far as like in a therapy room and in the treatment.
Can I take one pit stop really quick, just
Yeah.
in case that our listening audience isn't aware? Could you, because LSD, MDMA formulated in a lab, but I also heard you mention mescaline and peyote, and I wonder if you could just describe what those two organic, is my understanding those organic substances are.
Yeah, so basically, from what I understand, I haven't looked into those too much, but like a cactus plant. But anything, I should also note, I guess, anything being studied in clinical trials, for example, psilocybin is a synthetic version. so that it can be very regulated. Yeah, so whatever's being studied in government trials is probably not from the actual plant.
Gotcha. This is not the 1960s, 1970s shrooms, 1980s, 1990s. But it's not the shrooms that you're buying from that guy on campus. This is
Right.
something that's much more in a controlled environment, in a controlled dosage.
Definitely, yeah, and
Yeah.
based on like people's weights, dosing them to, yeah, so that it's individualized.
I mean, I want to highlight, I mean, I think hearing you talk about it, what strikes me is, we have medical cannabis in this state, but I think one of the challenges is it's a little bit of the Wild West, in as much as like there's not a lot of research or ability to know like how much like dosing and how much you should take and how to figure that out. Whereas this is different than that. This is much more controlled, or there's a lot more understanding of that
Yeah,
aspect of it.
definitely, it definitely seems so.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two others I was thinking, ibogaine, it's a Western African tree shrub that's being used specifically for opiate addiction. And if people are into documentaries, there's a great one on Amazon Prime called Dosed, featuring this woman who going through opiate addiction and how ibogaine and other psychedelics helped her recover. Yeah, and then psilocybin, I think most relevant to our conversation today with cancer patients, is being studied for addiction, major depression, and then end of life distress and depression with cancer patients.
Interesting. So could you say, I know that I kind of asked you to back up to just address what mescaline and peyote is, but I think you were going to start talking about what are these research studies maybe related to MDMA or psilocybin. What does that even look like? I heard you use the word assisted. Could you kind of talk a little bit more about like, I know it's not legal now, but if somebody was going to be able to do this, what would that look like? How is it being applied?
Yeah, definitely. So basically, I'd say psychedelic assisted therapy is like talk therapy, but enhanced with a psychedelic substance. So I can definitely speak to how MAPS is modeling their design, because I think a lot of other studies are very similar. But first, a client would be screened for counterindicated conditions like heart problems, or emotional conditions like schizophrenia in the family, or history of bipolar, because it's definitely counterindicated for conditions like that. So yeah, once screened, then there'd be preparation sessions. Right now it's designed as 3. And during that you would meet with, there's 2 therapists who you go through the process with. You'd meet with them and talk about what to expect, basically, risk, benefits, what's going to be going on in the room at the time of the dosing session, how long it will take, what will happen after. Basically a time for the client to ask questions and just get familiar with what they're going to go through. And then dosing session. So whatever the psychedelic substance is, there's a full day dedicated to that session. And basically the client takes the substance, and part of the ritual too is the therapists give the pill to the client, just in the act of that they're choosing it for themselves, and it's sort of starting the journey.
Yeah.
And during that day, the client is really encouraged to go inward. So there's not a lot of talk. There can be eye shades, headphones playing music. There's almost like a bed setting or a couch with blankets and pillows, basically to just encourage comfort, and like I said, going inward. And then the therapists are there that day, but they're not talking much. They're just there to ensure psychological and physical safety,
Interesting.
and help with logistics too, because at some point somebody might want to eat something or use the restroom, because it could be 6 to 12 hours.
Okay.
So
Oh, that was going to be my follow-up question. So I mean, thinking about the fact that this is like you're cramming in to a certain degree, like, you know, 2 to 4 months of therapy sessions, if you will, into this one experience, but it is a much more like internal focus and kind of helping to cultivate that internal focus, it sounds like.
yeah, definitely. And the therapist might take notes about some insight that somebody verbalized or themes that may be coming up, but definitely if there's a lot of talking going on, the therapists encourage the client to go back inside. And the main motto for a lot of this is trust, let go, and be open. So that's the intent for the session.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then so after a dosing session would come at least 3 integration sessions. And that's where the client starts talking about their experience, what they went through, trying to process how to translate this into their daily life and in the long term, sort of what lessons came up or, yeah, so that's processing it.
I mean, I have to say, I don't think I was really fully aware myself of, it seems like there is an emphasis, there's sort of this like bell curve almost of the experience of like, there's the build up to it of those 3 sessions, and then you're in it. And then there's the sort of after of like, how do we make sense of what this experience was like for you? But that experience is really focused on helping the person going through it be in the moment with their personal experience.
Yes, definitely. And in the field, the experience is known as what's healing. So I heard one of the researchers on a podcast say it really succinctly, and I liked it, that we know trauma can change the brain. So this is like reverse trauma. It's a positive experience that changes the brain. And yeah, I don't want to go into the whole brain science of it because I'm not too good with that stuff, but it deactivates the default mode network in the brain. So sort of shutting down fear, basically, being more open to being able to think about traumatic experiences or distress, or in this case, like impending death, stuff like that.
I mean, it almost sounds like it creates a neural environment for like out of the box thinking, that like the scripts that we have or the paradigms that we look at things through that may be informed by past experiences that are impacting our current behavior, that this experience kind of helps step outside of that, so that on the other side there's a different way of relating to things that there might have been like a veil over beforehand.
Definitely, yeah. I like to think of it too sometimes as what mindfulness meditation tries to teach, of like being a observer of your thoughts, like taking a step back, and so the psychedelic basically gives you that power to do that.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's like, 10 years of meditation practice without having to practice.
yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and I think I started watching, because there's a new documentary, and I know you and I have talked about it on Netflix. And people, just so you know, we do not own stock in Netflix or Prime. These are just places you can go. But that they turned Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, into, I think it's a 4-part docuseries based on his book. I mean, I'm guessing that you watched it. I wonder if you could just give a little insight, if people are interested, what they might see if they want to follow up after this with something more.
Yeah, so there's 4 parts. Each part is featuring one psychedelic in particular. And I think for this conversation today, episode 2 is most relevant. That's the psilocybin episode, and they do feature a cancer patient who, I believe she's in her 70s or 80s, who took psilocybin in one of these trials, and yeah, it changed her whole perspective on life. But yeah, I really like how the documentary, you can see actual cases of this.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So along those lines, I mean, I hear you making that connection between the research for psilocybin with cancer patients. Can you speak a little bit more about like what the research is looking for and what they've been finding specific to our population, our community?
Yeah, so both NYU and Johns Hopkins are doing, I think, well, at least the biggest studies I know with cancer patients using psilocybin for depression that comes with the cancer diagnosis, and then also for end of life distress for those who know they have a terminal diagnosis. And things they've reported, it's very interesting. So sort of this feeling of transcending your body. And I think that's really important for people that have cancer diagnosis, because sometimes it can feel like their bodies are breaking down or betraying them. But they're finding reports from participants that people are getting the sense that I am not my body, I'm more than this. I am not the cancer. So really being able to detach from what's happening to their body. Yeah, and then and this can happen, it's not just related to cancer, but a sense of oneness with the universe or nature, this idea that sort of like everything's going to be okay, I'm supported. Yeah, I'm part of something bigger than myself.
I mean, I can't help but notice like this sort of, to me, spiritual theme and spiritual connection that seems to be manifesting through this experience.
Definitely, yeah. I think how I read it was that the more connected somebody felt spiritually during this experience, or the higher the transcendence, in a sense, the more reduction in their anxiety and depression.
Huh.
And I forget the name of the questionnaire or the measure, but there was a measure for like basically like spiritual connection and spiritual experience
Yeah.
that are using this. Mhm.
And I do want to say, just to make it explicit, spiritual being distinct from necessarily religious. Like, I mean, do you have any sense of like people having the spiritual experience? Is there some correlation with people identifying as being religious or spiritual beforehand, or that's not even a necessary prerequisite to be having these experiences?
Right, definitely not. Yeah, even if people are not spiritual or religious at all, still having some sort of spiritual experience in the psychedelic dosing session.
Now, I know that we were just talking about the research with psilocybin, and it sounds like MDMA is the one that is more likely to be legalized next, if you will.
Yeah.
Which is a side note, and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but it's something that I've been wondering, and maybe you'll know. Ketamine, is that considered a psychedelic? Because I know they've been using that with depression, but I didn't know how to think about classifying that.
Yeah, so it is considered one. Now it was used, or still is, for anesthesia, but now is being used off-label in ketamine infusions for treatment-resistant depression. And then there's also S-ketamine, which is a nasal spray. And that was actually approved by FDA in 2019 for use for depression treatment.
Well, and I think that I feel like that is actually, that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure I was on the right track,
Yeah.
because kind of going back to, I think, to me, I think about psychedelics, like as a society having to like reformat our paradigm around it, because I think it's been associated with illicit drugs. But the reality is that we're already hearing about these substances, these medicines like ketamine. I think there's more awareness of that, but that not being linked with the fact that, like, hey guys, when you're hearing this ketamine assisted therapy, we're already talking about psychedelics being at this level of, community application.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I think I wanted to say too that psilocybin isn't too far behind. I think there's like a 2025 federal legalization for certain reasons, but
Okay.
from what I've understood, MDMA with PTSD is getting the furthest and has the most backing, just because with PTSD and veterans, they have the VA behind them, and then government approval, because it's such a big topic and issue with veterans, the PTSD. So yeah, that's I think that has to do with part of the reason for approving these trials.
Yeah, you get the military involved, that you're probably going to have some extra backing for that one. Well, and I think it speaks to, PTSD, especially thinking about within the veteran population, but I think also thinking about our own population and people experiencing PTSD after a diagnosis or a traumatic experience related to their health crisis, how intractable it can be, how difficult PTSD can be, how resistant it can be to treatment. And my understanding is like night and day. Like, this is not not a situation where, like, okay, now every week you're dropping acid or you're taking MDMA to like manage your PTSD. This is you are having this treatment experience, and then afterwards, and not just immediately afterwards, but my understanding is there is longer effect that they're finding that sustained of your symptoms are just gone.
Right, yeah, or at least significantly reduced. And yeah, going back to like the long-term idea too, I should have said in the trials too, they're doing the one dose, or they do three dosing days. And so there's essentially 3 rounds of the preparation, dosing, integration, and
Okay, gotcha.
and when it is legal, that's just sort of the model, but maybe people will need less than 3 doses or more. But essentially, I think it's just so exciting because people can, instead of taking an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication daily for the rest of their life, there's this potential of such a huge change with just a couple, well, in the grand scheme of things, just a couple or a short-term treatment.
Yeah. My God, I'm so excited. I'm having to stop myself from typing on my computer, maps, training. So I'm curious, what is legal right now in Illinois? I mean, let me back off of that and say, is there a difference between what is legal on a state level versus federally, kind of like what we see with cannabis, or is this a kind of a different situation with the psychedelics?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Right now, let's get like psilocybin, for example. In Oregon, at the state level, it's legal, used for, well, both recreationally and then in therapy. And I'm actually also in Illinois Psychedelic Society, and they are a big part of writing a bill that's being proposed in January of 2023, hopefully. But it's called the Illinois Compassionate Use of Natural Plants and Fungi Act.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. So that's going to decriminalize at the state level for us.
Okay.
things like possession, use, production, and giving away of natural plants and fungi. And then it will also create a way that people can get psilocybin assisted therapy even without a diagnosis. So that's going to open up treatment for a lot of people.
Can I ask about that with that, like, first off, is there any sense that you have, and you might not know, is there any sense of like how optimistic the society is that this bill is going to be able to be passed? Is it feeling like this is going to move forward, or is it like we're going to throw it out there and see what support we can get?
Yeah, so there's a lot of optimism. I haven't looked into it myself, but in meetings, they've talked about how in 2025, psilocybin is predicted to be federally legal.
Mm.
So they want to they want to propose this at the state level. And sorry, I should say federally legal in a therapy setting.
Yeah.
At least to start with. But at the state level, what they're doing differently is they're proposing sort of all decriminalization. Whereas cannabis started with medical.
Gotcha.
This is going like full on.
Similar to Oregon.
Right.
And when you say like here in Illinois, would we be looking at the same situation that's going on in a lab where it would be based on the composition found in a plant, but it would be like being given or purchasing something made in the labs, like something synthetic? Or is it literally like now we can go and we can buy shrooms and we can buy the actual mushroom at a store? Like what would that look like?
I think it's going to be both. So if it was the therapy setting, it would be more of like a synthetic specific dose pill, or but then it would be legal to go buy the mushroom plant or even grow to a certain extent, a certain amount at home, for example.
So it's kind of similar to like what the marketplace of cannabis looks like now, where you can get, you know, the actual flower, or you can be getting derivatives of it that have the same psychogenic effect.
Right.
I think that's right.
That sounds
I want to just take a step outside for a moment, because I realized just now that there was a question that came in.
Oh, okay.
And the question was, do people have bad trips? I mean, I think I grew up in the age of after school specials. And so, and also the age of, you know, just say no.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of like, you're going to go to some dark place and then you're going to have psychotic symptoms after you have the trip. What is the research showing related to that?
Yeah, so I love that question because it brings up something so important, just about the importance of set and setting. So set is going in what your mindset is when you go into taking the substance. And then setting is the environment you're in, who you're with. You know, is there music playing? Are there pillows, blankets, this and that? So if there is well-prepared set and setting, it's much more reduced risk of having a bad trip. And, you know, then if there is a challenging trip, at least in these settings, you do have the support from the therapist there, which is a big help. Because I think a lot of times when people have, you know, so-called bad trips, there's unpredictable factors in the environment that, you know, set off a bad mood and can change the whole experience. Yeah, and actually on that note, I'm a volunteer for Fireside Project. It's a hotline that is open 7 days a week, and people can call if they are having a challenging trip, or if they want to talk about a journey they had with a psychedelic substance to process it. So yeah, I just know from that training and talking with people that usually those challenging trips happen just based on not preparing well for it.
Yeah. Well, and as you were talking, I'm even thinking like, how would we even operationalize? Like, how would you define a bad trip? I think
Right.
I just think of like some after school special. I think Helen Hunt was in it and she like jumped out a window because she was having this bad trip. But like in reality, what does that typically entail if it is a more challenging experience?
Yeah, so usually I think it's related to just that loss of sense of control, and then also feeling almost like paranoid that you'll never get out of this altered state of consciousness. Um, so yeah, and definitely, the jumping out the window sort of idea, it's so rare that somebody would want to self-harm during that, but that's why it's so important to have, if this is a recreational experience, having trip sitters there, somebody who's sober, who's just there to ensure your safety, or in the therapeutic setting, having the therapists and doctors there.
Well, so on that vein, you've talked about doing this training.
Mhm.
Um, could you speak to, you know, when these move towards legalization, kind of what your recommendations would be to look at as far as somebody's looking to find a therapist that they can work with for psychedelic assisted treatment. Um, and yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up question, but let's start there. Like what would you recommend the training or the background be that somebody's kind of screening for?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, I would say a first stop is always the website called psychedelic.support. And those are professionals that have been, their background and training has been looked into, that they are psychedelic informed, and also it's called harm reduction informed. So being able and knowledgeable to talk with clients about what to expect with psychedelics, how to best prepare, and then having skill in helping clients integrate the experience after. So that part's legal right now. There are therapists out there doing harm reduction, preparation, and then integration. And I would start there as far as, that website, psychedelic.support.
Gotcha. And what might people, I'm just trying to think how to formulate this, like what symptoms or presentations would cause you to say, when this is legal, would cause you to say, I think this might be something to look into?
Yeah, definitely on the extreme end, somebody who is not responding to medications, for example, or long-term therapy. Somebody who, a lot of times people come to this as their last resort, but on the other end of that, I think this can be useful too for, mild symptoms, or adjusting to a diagnosis, for example, or the whole spectrum. I don't want to be too like, oh, this works for everything, because there's another side to this. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think part of what you're saying though is, there are these like frontline treatments that are kind of established, and they're established because there's just a history of research around them. I mean, what came to my mind is like thinking about treatments for like chronic pain.
Mhm.
And just to go off on a little tangent for a second, that there is this polyvagal informed intervention called the Safe and Sound Protocol that is extremely effective at helping people with managing chronic pain. But like I recently was in a training with somebody who is chronic pain specialist psychologist, and number one, they don't get patients. Well, really, not even number one. The whole of it is patients don't get referred to them for services until like 48 months of failed control with opioids. And what we're talking about here, thinking about the safe and sound protocol, but even thinking about psychedelics, is we're talking about treatments that are not ongoing long-term. They're not addictive. They're not physically addictive. And yet I think right now we're at a place of conversation and in research where we're really looking at those extreme examples or those more intense examples of symptomatology that maybe, I guess I'm introducing the idea of like, we think about these and they're getting associated with those extreme symptoms. And that's right now where the research is. But the reality is that's just where the research is. That doesn't mean that it may not still be beneficial almost, I don't want to say prophylactically, but like earlier on, like, a pound of what is it? A penny of prevention is worth a pound of cure, like that earlier on. We could find out that they're going to be just as beneficial up front as they are after somebody's been suffering with something longer term.
Right, definitely. I mean, yeah, I'll say when this is all legal, I would take clients that, aren't at extreme ends. They're, just, want a safe place, an informed and knowledgeable place to have these experiences. Because, whether it's legal or not, people are using these substances and sometimes even for therapeutic reasons. I even get calls on the hotline of people that are using it in attempts to heal. And I have talked to people who have cancer on the line using that. I am not condoning that at all, but whether it's legal or not, I think it's an important conversation or just thing to know about and how to, do that safely, what's coming down the line, all of that.
Well, and I'll say my hope here is that by us talking about it now, even though it's not something that we can offer to people, having this discussion, moving in a direction of destigmatizing or the potential of destigmatizing this so that when it does come out, that there isn't this sense of taboo or illicitness around something that actually is not only currently being researched, but has research from decades ago feeding into the research that's going on now.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it, destigmatizing it.
Yeah. Now, I want to acknowledge, I saw somebody's hand go up. Unfortunately, we're not able to take audio questions, but as I'm finishing up here with Gabby, if you have a question that you'd like to ask in our last minute, please feel free to type that into the Q&A or the chat box. So Gabby, just in closing here, curious if you could just give some recommendations if people are interested in getting more information or learning more about this research area, where would you direct them?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple different websites. If people are interested in being in trials or just what trials are going on, clinicaltrials.gov lists all trials going on. If you're interested in just sort of this topic and getting some other resources, I would go to firesideproject.org. And
I should say, I see Savina is tapping these into the chat. So if you're watching this live in Zoom, feel free to, I would recommend clicking on that so it calls up a window for you. Go ahead, Gabby.
Oh yeah, so Fireside has a great collection of links to all sorts of websites about research, about, finding guides, finding support and integration circles, like basically like support groups for people who want to talk about this stuff. Yeah, those are the two I would definitely point to.
Great. Oh, and it also in MAPS, I was going to say, it sounds like MAPS is right now like one of the most well-established like training organizations and research organizations around psychedelics.
Yeah.
Great, Gabby. So I love this conversation because it just energized my own interest in this area. I just think it has so much promise and really a new way of conceptualizing how to help people with their psychological symptoms and distress. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us here today.
Very welcome. Thanks for the opportunity. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you to those of you joining us on Zoom or watching on Facebook Live. Perhaps you're viewing this afterwards on YouTube, so thank you for tuning in. I will be back here next month in September, date to be determined, where we'll be talking about medical cannabis. So hope that you will join us for that topic. Thanks again, Gabby, and thanks to our audience. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Priscilla.
Okay.